Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast presented by Exo Mountain Gear. Today we have a return guest to the show. Jay Nichol from Mindful Hunter joins us. And Jay is an interesting guy in the hunting industry because he's carved a unique niche in terms of how he's gone from just being a hunter to, like I said, being part of the hunting industry. Jay is known for very in-depth, objective, non-sponsored gear reviews. He has a great platform for that. He does awesome things through his YouTube channel, cool hunt films. And since we've spoken to him last on the podcast, he's also gotten into guiding. In today's conversation with Jay, we're answering a bunch of your listener submitted questions. We announced that we were doing this show and just left it wide open-ended of, hey, what do you want to hear from Jay as well as myself and Steve? And so we get into a wide variety of topics today, from boxers, yes, underwear, which you'll hear about, to optics and choosing spotting scopes, budget gear recommendations, specific recommendations for bigger guys, aspects of the hunting industry, both good and bad, Jay's experience guiding and answering questions such as how much you should tip a guide, and a whole lot more. So again, this is a very wide-ranging conversation. I always enjoy speaking with Jay. I know that you will enjoy this conversation as well. As always, guys, if you have any questions for us for a future episode, send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. It would be great to hear from you. And if you are enjoying the show, it would help us greatly if you could leave a rating or review in your podcast app. We don't do any advertisers or sponsors, and so this show only grows by word of mouth and is only supported by you guys listening. So if you enjoy it, that support truly does make a difference and help out. Hit pause and do that now if you can. Come on back, let's dive into this conversation with Jay Nichol. Jay, I never anticipated starting a podcast like this with this question, but tell me about your underwear.
Well, maybe I should ask you to tell me about my underwear. It's funny. For people listening, I sent out some to Mark and Steve, and then Mark, you checked in with me, and you're like, just as they got there, you're like, oh, I'm doing a 30-mile overnight hike. And let's just take a moment and just appreciate how badass that is to do voluntarily for no particular reason other than self-development. There's no animal to kill at the end. It's not like you have to get an elk out. Yeah, I was just like, and you were like, should I risk it? Should I wear these? And like, I really wanted to. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, I want to text him. But then now I know what it's like for you guys when you send prototypes out, because I'm like, I kind of want to know, but I kind of don't want to know. If it was really good, would he have texted by now? Like I was doing that like nervous boyfriend, kind of texting game type of thing. And I'm like, maybe we'll just wait and talk about it on the podcast. But maybe for people who don't know kind of what I released or what I did, maybe I'll just give like a real quick overview. So as most people know, I review gear. It's part of my chosen vocation. And people have always asked me, when are you going to come out with something? Because you seem to figure out what's wrong with everybody else's stuff. When are you going to kind of plant your flag? And my answer has always been, when I think I have the ability to make a significant contribution to a field. Basically, when I think there's a hole in the market that I can fill, because I don't have any desire whatsoever to just put some white labeled branded piece of junk out there. You can see it all over the place. I could do that with a multitude of products. But I did have a desire to make something. I like making things. And a little bit of history. I think 3 years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, I put out a review called like the ultimate backcountry boxer review or something. I looked at 7 different kinds, found these Lululemons that to me were about as close to the perfect underwear as you could get, said so. And then about a year later, I went to re-up, did the standard guy thing. Oh, these are getting a bit holy. I'm going to go online and buy 6 pairs of the ones I already know I like. Do that. They show up at my house. And literally within 2 weeks, I'm out hiking. I reach my hand in my fly to adjust my boxers while I'm taking a leak, and I punch a thumb right through the hole, right through the fabric. And I guess they had switched fabrics. They still called them the same product. They still looked the same. All the marketing collateral was still the same, but all six pairs blew out inside of 6 weeks. Um, and ever since then, I've been looking around for underwear and could never find anything that kind of met my uh, criteria or requirements that I thought would be good enough for something else that I could recommend. And so earlier this year, I just kind of went to the drawing board. Luckily, I've done a lot of consulting for apparel brands, Arc'teryx, Lululemon, Adidas. I've worked with a lot of merchandising and design teams. So I had like a pretty, clear idea of what it took to kind of bring a product to market. And we don't need to get into all the details, but basically went through the typical, vetting a couple different factories overseas. And I'll say it right now, especially because I know how proud you guys are of being made onshore. If there was a way to financially viably make underwear in North America, I would be doing it. And as soon as I find one, I will. But for now, the best option I could do was overseas. And I went back and forth, maybe I think 5 or 6 different iterations. And I did a little spiel about this in the video I put out, but I think it's something that a lot of apparel manufacturers, especially in the hunting industry, have lost sight of. So I had this kind of 3-step design progress that was feel, fit, and function. And the first touch point an individual has with your piece of apparel is how it feels in the hand, and how it feels on the body. So that was the ultimate priority for me, is that the fabric had to feel fantastic, not just like satisfactory, not just okay, but it had to be, there's this principle in behavioral economics called surprise and delight. And when you can surprise and delight somebody, it creates like a notable memory for them that they then associate with your product moving forward. And like that was what I wanted out of my underwear. Like I wanted people to pick it up and like remark on it, like, oh, this feels nice. Because the problem in our industry is that a lot of technical fabrics sacrifice feel um, in search of function. And I mean, look at early polypro. That stuff was like wearing Velcro.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, I'm kind of rambling here, but those three, my North Star was feel, fit, and function. And I just kept going back and iterating until I had a product that felt phenomenal when I put it on, had a fit that was supportive without being constrictive. And the function, obviously, odor is always a thing with boxers, but ultimately to me, I thought nobody had really created a boxer specifically designed for the backcountry hunter. And my goal was a pair of boxers that fit and worked on day 10, just like they did on day one. Because all my boxers, even the ones I like after day 2 or 3, are just kind of these floppy rags down there. They lose all their shape after they've gotten sweat in and stretched out for 2 or 3 days. And so that was kind of, I would say, my most important design priority after the feel of the fabric was that they were still going to be snug, they were still going to dry quick, and they were still going to provide the same kind of support on day 10 that they did on day one.
How many different samples of fabric did you have to go through until you found the one that worked?
So the funny thing was, and I'll get into some of the details, I knew right away what I wanted my base fabric to be. So the base fabric was modal, and modal is a natural fiber made out of the cellulose of beech trees. And the reason I knew that is because my previous pair of underwear had that base fabric. What I
Oh,
didn't know was how much of a synthetic fabric to mix with it to get that ideal feel. And that was the funny part for me. So the modal is what gives it almost the cottony or silky feel. It doesn't feel like a scratchy, stiff synthetic material. It's very smooth, and it's very pleasing to the touch. The problem is if you go too much modal without enough synthetic, you don't get shape retention, you don't get
hmm.
that like nice supportive feel, and you get less stretch, which means there's less forgiveness for the end user. The more stretch you have in the boxer, the more in between sizes people will feel comfortable. Like I can kind of wear an XL and a double XL. You start to shrink, you start to take away some of that synthetic material. You start to get really pigeonholed into sizes. And if you're not perfectly in one of those sizes, the boxers either feel too tight or too loose. And so I had to go through three different iterations to basically find, and I use spandex. So it's a combination of modal and spandex. And that was really the kind of holy grail, was getting the exact percentage of each that would provide the feel while still, offering the shape retention I was looking for.
Hmm. And were you working directly with the mill to spec all this out
I
or
was
through
working
the sew
directly with
shop?
the manufacturer, so they would be the sew
Yeah.
shop. So they
Okay.
were, and that's been interesting too, because for example, they get my waistband from another distributor, so that would, playing a little. And this is for anybody who's looking to, prototype a product. MOQ, minimum odor quantity. You can get some pretty low MOQs. Like people will make 100 pairs of underwear for you if you really just want to make 100 pairs, but it's going to be really expensive and you're not going to have nearly as much control as you want. And I'd say I'm in the middle of the road right now where I've got a decent amount of control. My prices are okay and I can get okay shipping speed. But now that I've seen how well they've been received, I'm looking to kind of upgrade that. I want to get to like the kind of the next level of manufacturer where yeah, I can probably work. Like I've got some ideas for some custom fabrics. Like for instance, there's no Polygiene or Silvertech or any kind of artificial or synthetic odor fighting layering done in the fabric I have now. And I want to start experimenting with that. But you got to order like 5 to 10,000 pieces before they'll even start having that conversation with you. And also, after doing some research, I find some people actually have allergic reactions to Polygiene. And I don't know if you guys have ever looked into it, but before I commit to using any of those, I actually want to do a bit of a deep dive on what those products are actually made of, and maybe trial two or three different ones, because I'm still not 100% sure it's not a lot of smoke and mirrors as far as those odor fighting chemicals and different properties that they put in fabrics are.
Yeah, I've heard with Polygene in particular, there's something with not the allergic aspect to it. I think that there's something there too, but just in terms of its effectiveness,
Yeah.
like people have a certain, I don't know if it's like pH or something about an individual's makeup that essentially makes Polygene more or less effective for them, which is
The
crazy.
other thing that I've heard, and I kind of screwed up, it wasn't allergic reaction, but the two individuals that I spoke with, and I think this goes further to what you say, they actually find their clothes get much stinkier with Polygiene. And so again, I think it's some weird, maybe it's an acidic pH balance or some different thing in their skin or the way that they sweat, maybe their salinity levels. I don't know, but it has a completely opposite reaction for them.
Huh. Wild. Well, I didn't text you, Jay, and I meant to. I've just had a crazy. Well, one, I was up all night, and then I was
Of
hoping to
course,
come
of
home and
course.
get a nap, and that never happened. We had a bunch of storms roll through. My parents had damage of the property. It was wild. And then it got to the point where I was like, well, shoot, I'm just gonna talk with to Jay in a couple days, so I'll just
Yeah,
talk to him
yeah.
then. I did take them. I wore them, which is, like anything. I have a pair of boxers that I love. I have a pair of boxers I know, like I have zero hesitation to go do 10 days in them right now, right? So when you have something like that, and then you're looking at, okay, I'm gonna go hike 30 miles tonight. Sure, it's just a night, but still, it's 30 miles, it's hours. Like, do I want to risk something new? But I literally got them in the mail that day, that afternoon before we left, and put them on. I thought, dang, these feel pretty stinking good. And that's when I texted you, like, I don't know if I should risk this. And what I'll say is, and I think this is uh, good feedback. I never thought about the boxers, and I forgot that I was wearing something new slash different until I was like 5 or 6 hours into hiking. And then it was like, oh yeah, I'm trying these new boxers. And as soon as I realized that I never thought about them one time, I was like, dang, that's really good. Because we say that like with our packs, right? Like at the end of the day, if you're so comfortable under the pack that you're just busy hunting and you're not frustrated by something or you're not having shoulder fatigue or something's not rubbing you or squeaking or whatever, and you just forget about the pack, that's like ultimately what we want. And so essentially the same thing happened with the boxers. I wore them the whole hike. I packed my other pair of boxers that I know I love because I was like, man, if these things start like rubbing me, itching me, chafing me, anything, like I'm not gonna wear them. But I never thought about them until I was like hours into the hike and they performed great. And yeah, so that's my initial feedback. I'm super curious to like wear them, like what you were talking about, Jay, of what happens on day 2, 3, 4, 5 plus on a hunt, both in terms of like fit, comfort, odor, all that stuff. But initially, yeah, I think there's a ton of promise in them.
That you, oh, I could not be happier because I actually forgot to, I'm glad I actually forgot to mention that when I was describing them. But that was the other design goal I had. And I'm still trying to come up with like a bit of a slogan about this, but it's like, I want them to be the underwear that you forget you're wearing because I think you hit the nail on the head. Any piece of gear that works well, there's like a direct inverse correlation between how often you think about something and how well it's working. Our
Hmm.
body is the same way. We only think about our ankle when it's sore. And so that's phenomenal feedback. I'm glad. And I'll be interested once you get a chance to kind of wear them more. But and this is your reaction and approach is almost consistent with everybody who's come on board and tried some. I can go look at the statistics on the website. What happens is people buy a 2 pack and then 3 weeks later they come back and buy a 6 pack. And I'm like, I've done enough follow-up phone calls now. I know exactly what happened. Like men are very interesting. It's like I was originally going to do a 3 pack instead of a 2 pack to get the sale price. And my buddy was like, I don't know, man. Three feels like you're asking me to replace all my underwear. And I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that without having worn them first. And I'm like, you're 100% right. Like as men, it's not something we think about a lot, but once we find something that works for us, we're very hesitant to switch. And so, but then once we decide to switch, guys go in, it's like, okay, this is what I'm wearing now, and I'm gonna switch all my underwear over. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I would have expected nothing less than you bringing a backup pair. That's pretty funny.
Well, I was glad I didn't need them.
I think when we were doing an experience project last year, Mark, I remember in the clothing video, I specifically talked about underwear and like you need to train in the pair that you're going to wear on a hunt. Most specifically because of the waistband, whether if it's too soft and it rolls over, it's just getting compressed between the pack hip belt and obviously your body. And so having that waistband is pretty critical. I've had ones that I like the fit, but the waistband sucks, and well, those don't work. So did you have to go through a bunch of prototype variations on that, or did you kind of get lucky and nail that right out of the gate?
No, I had to go through three, and I would let's be honest. Just like you guys are on the fourth version of the K series of packs, I'm already keeping notes for what will at some point be the second iteration of these
Mm-hmm.
boxers. And I think there still might be room for some improvement on the waistband, but it got to the point where I'm like, this is as perfect as I think it can be. And I think until I go put it on 500 people and I get different body types and different pack
Mm-hmm.
sizes and all that kind of stuff. But you nailed it because you're basically it's this catch 22 where I need my waistband to be stiff enough that it doesn't roll over or fold in half, but it can't be so thick from being stiff that it kind of stacks underneath my hip belt. And also, the thicker the waistband, the more moisture retention. And I hate that like swampy waist feeling. I want something that's going to dry kind of quickly. So, yeah, I went through three different iterations of the waistband until I landed on the one that it is now. And I think I've only one guy sent in a comment that it rolled over on him. But then when I go back through all my other reviews and follow-up phone calls I've made, it's something people are actually calling out that the waistband isn't rolling over on them like they're used to with other pairs of boxers. And that was something that was really important to me because that drives me crazy when it kind of rolls over. And then once it gets that crease in it, you're just like, you're done. Every time you put on those
Hmm.
boxers, the same thing happens again as soon as you put your pack on.
You've mentioned phone calls a couple times, Jay. We're not going to spend the whole time talking about underwear, but I think it is really. I'm sure there's people who are interested in just hearing more about the process because, as you said earlier, you haven't been a product guy. You've been associated with brands, you've done product stuff, you've consulted, but you've never like, hey, I'm gonna start my own clothing and source my own product and go through factories and all this stuff. What this phone call piece, this customer piece, this, hey, I received, all of these boxers that I made and now I have to start selling them, but I also want feedback, right? When you say phone call, are you just proactively calling customers? What is that looking like?
Yeah, 100%, man. And I will give you guys a large amount of credit with my kind of customer discovery process. The way, because we didn't really know each other until I reviewed the K3, and then we started talking more, and then I got to participate in the K4 prototyping process, and seeing how Steve ran that and how hands-on he was, and the fact that we had a Zoom call just to go over my thoughts afterwards, and he was like very deliberate and interested and followed up. I was like, that was kind of fresh in my mind. I'm like, I know they're just boxers, but I think they should be approached with the same level of intention. So there was a couple different things that I was looking for. Like the first time it happened, I noticed somebody bought two pairs of large, and then 3 days later, after they got delivered, they bought two pairs of extra large. And I thought to myself, okay, something's gone on here, and I want to know what. And another element that I put a lot of thought into was the sizing on the site, and I still think I can make that better because I think one of the hardest things about underwear, especially because you can't return them, is like how do I get the right size on the first order? Because it's like even two pairs with shipping is going to be like $50. Like it's not an inconsiderate amount of money. So it's like you want people to be able to get it right out of the box. And so when I saw that he ordered the two large and he ordered the two extra large, I was like, is there something I could have done better? And so I just picked up the phone and I called him. And I was like, hey man, I noticed you got the large and now you're ordering extra large. Is there any information I could have provided that would have helped you get into the boxers quicker, the right boxers quicker? And the funny story is with this guy, he was like, actually, it's just my mistake. I thought I ordered extra large and I ordered large. And so we just kind of had a quick conversation and got some more feedback on him from the fit and function and said that was that. But then that gave me the idea I need to have more like consistent follow up with people. So whether it's just randomly calling a couple people that have bought boxers, a lot of people engage with me on Instagram, and so I'll have an idea that they've tried them and maybe I already know them a little bit. But also, there's something impersonal about product reviews. I feel like if you consume my content, you're probably biased already. You're probably going to go out of your way to go on my site and give me a 5-star review and write something nice. And I deeply appreciate that. And the business wouldn't survive without people doing that. But is that the most critical feedback I can receive? And I almost feel like I should be willing to take my own medicine. Like if I hold companies to these really high standards where I want them to be trying to create the best products capable, and I'm going out of my way to kind of find what's wrong with them, I want to be open to taking that same type of feedback. And I think a phone call, some type of in-person conversation is the only way to really get that. I'm not going to ask somebody to write a long-winded email, or I am putting together a survey that I think once I get about 3 months of product sales, I'll be sending it out to people and I'll offer a little giveaway in exchange for their 5 to 7 minutes to do my survey, where I can kind of like on a wide scale capture more trends about the boxers. But yeah, I just really wanted to have in-person conversations with people who had tried the boxers, whether they liked them, whether they didn't, what they did, what they didn't, and really trying to fine tune that customer journey. Like, is there anything I can do better on my end so that it's easier for you to get the right product for you quicker?
All right, shifting gears. I
Yes, sir.
think since you were on the podcast last, I don't think we talked about this, but you're guiding now. You're guiding
I am.
hunts for bear and mule deer, correct?
That is correct. And actually, before we shift gears, I want to throw out one more thing. If people go and pick up boxers between now and April 30th, every $5 you spend gets you one entry to win a Swaro ATX 85 millimeter spotting scope.
Oh, cool.
So there you go.
We'll,
Awesome.
we'll come back to 85 millimeter scopes in a minute.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so you're guiding now. You're guiding black bear hunts, mule deer hunts. I
Yep.
am curious, just your perspective now on the guiding side of things, because what we announced that we were doing this podcast. We got a whole bunch of suggestions for questions to talk about, some good ones. One of them was tips for booking, or no, well, that was a different one. Sorry. How much should you tip a guide? Which is a very common question.
Mhm.
I'm curious now, being on the guide side of that, what have you seen, learned? How would you kind of address that question?
Yeah, well, I'll answer the question directly and then I'll give my thoughts on my guiding experience to date. For your average hunt, 10% is kind of the industry standard. I think when hunts get like really cheap or really expensive, that number can fluctuate a little bit. I've got an Alaskan brown bear hunt booked, an archery hunt, and I know right now I can't afford to give that guy a 10% tip on that hunt. I'm like mortgaging my house just to do the hunt itself. And I know, if somebody's doing like a $25,000 goat hunt or a $80,000 stones hunt, like, no, they're not doing 10%. So I think at that point, it becomes a little bit more subjective. But I think if you haven't been on that many hunts and you're going on something in the neighborhood of like 6 grand to 12 grand, a very industry standard tip would be 10%. And then if they do something really outrageously impressive, obviously bump it up a little bit. And the other thing that most people would already know this, but I think it is maybe unethical is too strong of a word, but whether or not you are successful should not impact the tip that you give. Now, I don't know if it can help. We're biased individuals. Like, yes, if you kill something, you're going to be more likely to want to show your appreciation to the guide. But just remember, there are things out of that guide's control. And it's the guide you're tipping, not the outfitter. And it should be based more on the experience that he or she was able to deliver to you and the engagement and the relationship and the care that they paid to you should be more of the reason that you're giving them a tip than whether or not you killed an animal or the size class of the animal. So yeah, and I would be, I'd be interested if that kind of aligns with your guys' experience as well, or if you guys know lots of guides. Do you think anybody else would provide advice to the contrary?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
I like what you said about the outcome, because that is, you know, yes, I don't want to equate what a guide deserves based on the outcome of the hunt. It's like what
Yeah.
you said, it's the experience that they're offering. It's hopefully um, their dedication, not just to providing a good experience, but the type of experience you want. So I think one of the best things guides can do is understand the client and know, okay, aside from like showing up and you want to kill a bear, you want to kill a mule deer, like what type of experience do you want? What type of hunting style? You have to read the client. Like, how hard can I push you? There's a certain, obviously I know Mark Roanhorst really well. He's the only guide that I've technically hunted with, and him guiding goat and sheep. I know one thing he has to do is read that client to know how hard he needs to push them, because those are difficult hunts, and then how hard he can't push them, right? Because like you take a client on a hunt like that in particular, and a lot of them are going to need some some pushing, but you can't push a guy past his limits per se if he's not like ready to go there. So I just think there's a lot to being a guide and like understanding the client, and hopefully if you're on the hunter side of that, you feel like that's what the guide has done for you. Like, yes, tried to help you be successful, but also done that in a way that is somewhat unique to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you hit on another point why I wanted to get into not only just guiding but outfitting, and the two outfits that I have, Black Bear in BC and the Mule Deer in Alberta, are both mine. So I control the entire experience from selling the hunt to booking it to getting the guy here to guiding. I don't even have any guides right now. I do all of it, soup to nuts. And part of that came from, again, just like the underwear, I felt like I could deliver something that the market wanted that didn't exist. I think there's this new kind of hybrid client in the guiding industry. Whereas like years ago, there would be like two groups of hunters. There's hunters that went on guided hunts, and there's hunters that didn't. And then there was a very small group that had like a once in a lifetime goal of going on a guided hunt. I think because of, we can call them adult onset hunters or whatever you want, we have this new breed of guys that want to be DIY hunters. They didn't grow up doing it, and they're looking for ways to accelerate their learning curve. And a lot of these guys are in their late 30s and early 40s, have a bit extra cash, and would totally do a couple guided hunts if that got them, up to speed quicker with being able to do their own stuff. And I actually did that when I first started and was like really disappointed. And you learn very quickly, oh, these are guides, they're not teachers. This is not training school. They are just, so I don't want to call anybody out or say they didn't. It was more of like missed expectations. Like what I wanted from the hunt wasn't what they were selling. It wasn't like they failed to give it to me. And so when you talk about talking with the client about what their expectations are, I think that's what's kind of missing. And again, I'm not trying to, talk bad about any current outfitters. I'm just based on my own experiences. I think spending time with that client, like some of the conversations I've had with guys, specifically about the bear hunt this year, because my bear territory is a combination of like very Idaho, like you guys, it's pretty severe, but there's a lot of Idaho that would be quite similar to my area, except it's coastal. But there's like big steep mountains, and then there's lots of logging, there's lots of drainages, there's a couple of transmission lines cutting through, like it's a gigantic area. And so when I'm talking with these guys, it's like, what are your priorities? Like, do you want to go spend more time with a backpack and spike camp? Is the ultimate priority killing a bear? Because some of the decisions we're going to make could actually result in lowering the likelihood of your hunt, of your success on the hunt. But if I know your priorities, I can craft the hunt for you. Like some of these guys have like said specifically, listen, killing a bear is secondary to me on this hunt. It's more about spending some time with you up in the Alpine, learning more about where should I be setting up my tent? What kind of gear should I be bringing with me? And so, in a lot of ways, you're having to make decisions about crafting that hunt for them, in order to meet their priorities. And that was where I don't know if that gets done all the time. And I think for outfits that are really big and really famous, and everybody knows what those outfits offer, that's fine because people know what to expect. But I think there's a lot of like middle of the road outfitting going on that guys are getting into with expectations that aren't being met, probably just from a lack of communication more than anything, where what they're hoping to get out of the hunt is not something that outfitter is actually even offering in their hunt.
Like is a very, very real and under noticed like need of exactly what you said, especially older hunters who didn't grow up hunting, who are now going on these hunts, but they're not just trying to kill an animal, they're trying to gain experience and they're trying to gain confidence and they're trying to know like what is it like to live in the mountains for 5 days or what have you. And if you've just flipped that to 20 years ago, most hunters going on a guided hunt often had hunting experience. And I think now there's a higher percentage of higher, meaning not the majority, but just compared to back then, you have a real clientele now who is going on a guided hunt, but is doing it to learn, gain confidence, and become a hunter, not just like check the box to fill that tag.
Yep, 100%.
How many hunts are you guiding?
So right now, it's kind of funny. I've just added two more. This year in total, I will do spring bear for 5 weeks, and then I have
Wow.
4 mule deer spots. The way guiding works in Canada is different in each province. So the territory that I have in British Columbia, bears are an unquoted animal. So there's no quotas for bear tags in your area. Once you have the outfitting rights to a given area, you can sell one tag, you can sell 100 tags. It's kind of up to the outfitter to responsibly manage that area. That now, obviously, that's different for quoted animals when you start getting into, moose, sheep, elk, all that kind of stuff. Then you get so many tags for every 5 years, and then the tags refresh at the end of the 5 years. In Alberta, I own a set number of tags. So I have the archery hunting rights for a particular unit for mule deer in Alberta. And there's only 4 tags in that unit for archery mule deer. So I have all 4 tags and I can only sell 4 hunts. Whether people tag out or not doesn't matter. As soon as those 4 hunts are sold, that unit is done for the year. So I'll do 4 mule deer hunts, and then I think I have room for 2 guys. I have 1 week left open. So right now I've got 4 weeks booked with 8 guys. And my wife, it was so funny. I think we're going to talk a little bit about this, hopefully as well later on, but I'm going to go do the shoot to hunt course in the 3rd week of January. And so I was specifically leaving the second week of January open because I didn't want to go do 4 weeks of guiding or 5 weeks of guiding and then straight to that course. But my wife saw how well everything was going, and she's like, just open up the week. She's like, you're already leaving me with the kid for a month. It doesn't really matter if it's one more week. And I was like, okay, I twist my rubber arm. All right, I'll have 2 more people down. So yeah, in total, 5 weeks of bear and then 4 mule deer hunts.
Cool. You mentioned in all that guiding talk and you being the outfitter as well, you mentioned Alberta and British Columbia. We had a question that mentioned both. Jay, I don't know any context. I don't know if this is a good question, a dumb question, a dramatic question.
Oh, it's a great question.
None of the above. I did send you the questions that you do, but someone submitted and said, as an influencer and guide hunting in both Alberta and British Columbia, what do you think of the Alpine carnivore lawsuit? I don't know what any of that means.
Yeah, so let me give you a little high level kind of context on this. So about a year ago, there was a YouTube guy named Alpine Carnivore who got caught for poaching. Really severe, like sheep. Basically, there was several different charges, but one of the fundamental charges was that he hunted as a resident simultaneously in 2 provinces and then claimed somehow later he didn't know that was illegal. And so he got charged with a whole bunch of stuff. His offices got raided. All of his mounts got taken. They found bullet casings at both kill sites with his DNA and the DNA of the animals on it. And it was pretty cut and dry. Since that has occurred, he went and hired a lawyer that is known for taking cases against conservation officers. And I don't know him personally, so I'll refrain from making any type of comments about, his ethics or anything like that. But I think it's safe to say, and he would not argue, that he is known for fighting cases against conservation officers so basically they are claiming that the conservation officers were unduly, what would be the word? They went after him too hard and they were harassing him. And essentially for them charging him with the poaching, he has lost, a sizable amount of his income. He lost his sponsors. He lost his YouTube channel, and he's now suing them for $2.3 million, which is whatever. It's just, yeah. And the thing is and I pray to God these guys didn't make some type of chain of custody or evidentiary mistake, because I know people who knew some of the evidence. I know this case quite this was open and shut. This dude, he filmed these hunts. He was simultaneously killing animals inappropriately. He was hunting other people's tags.
Goodness.
It was very, very wrong. And it was not debatable. And so I hope there hasn't been some kind of screw up. And maybe I'm, putting myself out there by saying as much as I am, but I hope, because just kills me that this even happened in the first place. And so before I get into comments in the lawsuit, I want to share another case that recently, just last Monday, was in the paper. There was another group of influencers slash YouTubers called Backcountry Carnivores. And I know this because I know these gentlemen and I had them on my podcast. And three of them, two of them who are part of the group and a third guy who wasn't, recently just got a battery of charges. The one guy got something like 27 charges, including killing an animal less than 6 hours after exiting a plane. He's got firearm charges. They took illegal animals from one unit and claimed they shot it in another unit. Like it reads like a grocery list. And it's three of these guys. And they did it because they were making YouTube videos and putting stuff on Instagram. And it was like, I was going to lose my mind because I'm like, are you kidding me? Like back to back years, two of these like, and I hesitate to even use the word like influencer or content creator. Like, I'm sorry, you're just not a good person, man. Like, I don't want to use foul language, but it's like, I get so upset because I've spent 10 years doing what I do. My channel never blew up. I don't have a million followers. I don't stack bodies every year. I love hunting. I want to meaningfully share how hunting has impacted my life in the hopes that I can help other men and women experience that same type of transformation through hunting and through the backcountry. And that means a lot to me. Like, it's what I do with my life. And then to see people who are more concerned about blowing up on social media than they are about the ethics and the principles and the philosophy of what we do and why we do it. And especially in the climate that we currently find ourselves in, where every time we turn a corner, somebody's trying to take away our rights. And then you're just giving them this ammo. Like, it just breaks my heart. And so, yeah, not only does there seem to be a trend of guys who are willing to, completely bend their ethics in order to just kill stuff for the gram. Now the guy is actually threatening the province or suing the province because of what he did. So that's the situation as a whole. And that's how I personally, those are my personal thoughts and opinions. But yeah, that's the situation.
Dang. I didn't know anything about it. That's a lot to process. And like you said, it's freaking just very, put a lot of words to it. It's very disheartening.
Very. Yeah. Yeah. It's bad. And it's such a bad look for BC. Like, I know, like, if it wouldn't be any better if it was anybody else's home, but I just feel like we don't have a whole lot of, like, we're not Utah, we're not Colorado, we don't got 400 influencers running around. Like, there's not that many of us here. And so to have, that significant of a percentage of them do something bad, like, it really reflects poorly on everyone.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad your channel isn't called Mindful Carnivore because I'm seeing a pattern there.
I thought the same thing. I was like, if anybody wants a tip, do not include the word carnivore in your branding.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, well, before we get off on a whole rabbit hole that's probably justified, but maybe saved for a better conversation, different day.
Yeah.
You mentioned an 85 millimeter spotter earlier. Question came through. It said, I would like to know each of your recommendations for a versatile spotting scope, specifically on objective size. I know Mark has and likes his ATS 65. Steve seems to favor smaller spotting scopes, and Jay has recommended 85 millimeter spotters and doing some extra squats. He says, my use case is elk, deer, and pronghorn in the lower 48. Thanks for the podcast. It's been one of the best resources for me going from zero to having hunted in the last several seasons. One of the things, I don't think we were chatting earlier, Jay, before I think we hit record. I don't think this will make it, but part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast with you, other than to just catch up, but I think it is helpful because you are thoughtful really in everything you do, the decisions you make, etc. But you have a different perspective than Steve and I do. And part of that's just driven by hunting in a different place, things like that. But this probably is an area where maybe we have some thoughts. I know that at the same time, you've tested a ton of optics. We get countless, endless optics questions. So I'm not only, I guess, interested to answer maybe this question in comparing objective size, but really to get to the heart of his issue. He's saying, hey, I need a spotter for elk, deer, pronghorn. Like, where do you even begin that recommendation or conversation for that guy in particular? Much less what, the difference is between you and me and Steve.
I think he's already helped us out to a certain degree by saying he's in the lower 48, by saying he's in the target species. Listing those three as his target species, I can start to make some assumptions
Mhm.
about how important trophy class is to him and the kind of things he's going to need from a spotter. I think the first thing to clarify is that there's no perfect piece of gear. And as a general rule, the more problems you try to solve with one piece of gear, the less effective it becomes at solving each of those problems, which means you're better off with a scalpel than a sledgehammer 99% of the time. However, in direct opposition to that is budget. We can't all own 4 different spotting scopes. So we have the perfect spotting scope for, each hunt. So then the question arises is like, because that would also drive this conversation for me, is like, give me a budget range, because that's going to impact what the recommendations that I would give. And I'll touch on my 85 recommendation. I do believe the best general purpose spotter on the market is the Swaro ATX 85. And for a bunch of reasons, like the modularity, being able to swap objectives, the glass quality, the coatings, all that kind of stuff. But it's one of the most expensive spotters on the market as well. It's the reason it's the one spotter I've went out and bought for myself to own, because it's the one, no matter where I go and no matter what I do, if that's in my backpack, I feel like I'm covered. But there's no denying the fact that you are carrying more weight. Like, you're paying a weight penalty to have that versatility. The other thing I've always tried to tell people is that filming my hunts is a large part of what I do for a living. So by me bringing an 85 and having an additional ability to capture even better digiscoping footage, I'm not bringing a long lens for my camera. So I can kind of like do some mental gymnastics and subtract the weight of a long lens off of that spotter, and I'm kind of right back where I would be in, back in a 65 territory. I will say, and lots of my opinions exist on a spectrum, I have been being pulled over more towards the smaller spotters lately. And I think that's an experience thing. I think when you first start hunting, you always think bigger is better. And in a lot of ways, it is. But also, the better you get at hunting, the less you need to rely on the bigger glass, and you can get away with smaller glass. If that makes any sense. Like, I think it's fairly safe to say the most common spotting scope in use by sheep guides in British Columbia is the Swaro ATS 65. And a lot of people would say, well, if you're going to age a sheep, you need the biggest scope possible. And what a guide will tell you is you ain't aging any sheep until you're sub 500 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you're sub 500 yards, it doesn't matter if you have a 65 or an 85. And that's where that experience comes into play, is like, what is this glass actually going to do for me? The other thing is environmental variables. Like, as soon as you have a good deal of heat kick in, I've actually had a lot of cold mirage lately. I've had wind mirage in this Alberta. I was dealing with this weird stuff this year. And bigger optics actually exacerbate those effects. So, yeah, that's a long-winded answer. And I'm not even sure if it has, if I'm giving a direct piece of advice or answering his question. The one last piece I want to throw in is I literally 2 days ago just put up a review on the Maven S3 67 millimeter spotting scope. And that thing retails for $1,800. And that's my new, like, all-purpose recommendation, because this is the most common question I get. I got $2,000 to get a spotter. What do I get? And I've always said, save up another grand, and go buy either the ATS 65 or save up your money and get the 85 or go get a cow at like, because all the good spotters seem to start in that $3,000 to $3,500 range. And after thoroughly testing that Maven S3, it's the only spotting scope in its category that has fluorite glass in it. I was very impressed by the build quality, by the clarity, the ergonomics, the functioning, the eye box, all of it. So that is a very clear recommendation I can make. If you're in that sub $2,000 and you want a spotter, especially for this guy, if you're hunting deer, elk, and pronghorn in the lower 48, I don't think there's anything you could want out of a spotter that Maven S3 67 millimeter isn't going to give you, and it's only $1,800. Like very affordable in comparison to its competition.
Had you looked through any of the smaller previous Maven stuff? Because they
It was
struggled.
crap.
Yeah, okay. That was our
Garbage.
experience. Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
I agree. And that's why I was so skeptical. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did a 65 millimeter spotting scope. And at the time they sent me that little one. It was like a C1A, or I can't remember what it was called. But I even said in the video, I'm like, yeah, this thing is just hot trash. Don't even bother with it. And that's why I was so impressed. And I think maybe that's why they put so much effort into the S3 series. I don't know. But I had a completely different experience with that glass than I did with that little rinky dink thing.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I just pulled it up. It comes in mill and MOA reticles as well as a standard just zoom eyepiece. Interesting.
Yep.
Huh, cool.
Is that brand new? That S3A?
I want to say maybe a year old. And here's the other thing I'm going to say. You're going to pay a bit of a weight penalty. It's 10 ounces heavier than the ATS 65, but it's only 4 ounces heavier than the ATX 65. So the ATS 65 is 50 ounces. The ATX 65 is 56 ounces. And the Maven S367 is 60 ounces. And that's why something costs $3,000 compared to $1,800. I think you can there's no free lunch with optics. And so if you've got disposable income and you want to buy 10 ounces out of your backpack, get the ATS 65. If you're younger, you're on a budget and you got a nice strong back, save yourself, $1,100 and buy the Maven S3 and carry the extra 10 ounces. But I want to make sure to bring that up because that's definitely, that's the trade-off with that optic. And it only goes up to 40X. And I think Maven made a really excellent decision here because if you look at the Vortex Razor, it goes up to 48. That thing falls apart after 35X. I don't care what environmental conditions you're in. On paper, it says it goes to 48X. It is not clear up to 48X. And I think Maven, with the quality of the glass and the coatings and everything that went into that scope, they made the decision that we can offer superb clarity up to 40X and then we just stop. And so you are losing a 10X between that and the ATS 65. But I think that's one of those things where guys who don't have a ton of experience are going to get lost in the numbers on a piece of paper. I'm telling you right now, you go out into the field, you put those two things back to back, that Maven at 40X and the ATS at 50X, yes, the ATX is going to be a little tighter, a little more detail. But as far as practical functionality, it's not going to stop you killing something or figuring out what a potential score could be on that mule deer, or it's not going to negatively impact you in the field to a large degree.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because I just noticed that looking at it, that it was only to 20 to 40. And I was going to bring that point up of, I'm hoping they did that out of realistic self-restraint. Because as you said, especially you get to the budget end of the spectrum, a lot of times the higher end of that zoom range is just unusable,
It's
pointless.
garbage. Yep.
You're taking less quality glass, magnifying it, only magnifying imperfections. And so it would be really interesting to know, did they actually limit themselves at 40 so they could provide a good usable range and actually have good optics throughout the range rather than just advertising yeah, it's up to 50 or up to 60, but that top end's not usable. That'd be interesting.
And here's the other thing that I think we need to note. It goes all the way down to 20. The ATS only goes to 25. So the exit pupil of that Maven at minimum magnification is 3.35 millimeters. The exit pupil of the ATS at minimum magnification is 2.65 millimeters. So you have a 0.75 millimeter greater exit pupil on the Maven at minimum magnification than the Swaro. That's like 30% bigger. If you're looking to squeeze out a couple minutes at dawn and dusk, not only do you get a significantly increased field of view at 20x, you're going to get significantly more light with that extra exit pupil. And that's what I like to tell people. I'm like, listen, okay, it might not go all the way up to 50, but when are you really finding animals? You don't find animals at 50. You go in and look for fine details at 50. You find animals at 20 and 25 when you're like, you've got it minned out, you're kind of looking around, it was more of like a landscape level glassing. And so that was another thing that I think it's almost like an unanticipated benefit of that spotting scope. I think it almost unintentionally has better low light performance than some of its more expensive counterparts.
Let me shift to a pack question. I'm curious genuinely to get your take on this and what your experience has been. I don't think we've ever talked about it. Someone asked, are exo packs waterproof or do I need a rain cover? And then he said, we hunt here in Washington State and it is wet. Capital WET, wet, exclamation point. So obviously, if people know EXO at all, we don't offer a rain cover. We've talked about our waterproof dry bag, etc. We've talked about how the pack is water resistant. Water resistant doesn't mean the same thing as waterproof. Jay, I know that you hunt in areas that have been wet, whether that's, rain, snow, all the above. Again, we've never talked about this. What has your experience been with when you have been wearing an EXO pack in wet conditions and how it's performed for you?
And this is also something where I know more about Steve's packing philosophy than yours, Marks, but I know me and Steve differ drastically on how we pack packs, which I find very interesting. And I might actually try and switch it up this year because I feel like I've written off a system without actually truly trying it. But I'm pretty OCD. Like I need everything in little bags and organized in other bags. And like, I like a Tetris-like packed pack. And I can't just cram a bunch of stuff in there. So my approach has always been vulnerable stuff goes in dry bags. So if it's electronics, it goes in dry bags. If it's apparel, it goes in dry bags. If it's my sleeping bag or sleeping pad, it goes in a dry bag. And normally that's all very intentionally thought out. So if my bag is exposed to like, let's say an ambient or a moderate amount of moisture, people underestimate the water shedding capabilities of the Cordura, especially the stuff that's in the EXO packs. If I'm in a moderate amount of moisture, I don't worry about it whatsoever, especially because the way the packs are constructed. Like you have your lid, then you've got your snow collar. It's not like water's coming down and in there at all. So under 80% of conditions, I have been fine with just my dry bag, like mini dry bag approach, packing thoughtfully and realizing that some of the stuff that doesn't matter is going to get wet in my pack and I don't really care. Then I've had a couple of hunts over the last couple of years where not only did it rain an absolute, metric ton, it didn't dry out in the next few days. And what I realized was, okay, now things are definitely getting wet inside my pack. And not only that, my pack is way heavier, unnecessarily so. And so I have moved to carrying a dry bag, like a rain cover with me. And it actually took me a while to find one that wasn't like heavily branded with some brand that I wasn't interested in advertising on my back as I walked around the mountains. But I was able to find a Sil Nylon one from MEC, Mountain Equipment Co-op, which is like Canada's version of REI. It was like $35. It's built to fit 100 to 120 liter pack. It weighs about 3.5 ounces and it works incredibly well. The other reason that I like having that rain cover with me is nighttime. I'm a big guy. I take up a lot of room in the tent. I use a lot of minimalist style shelters. I do a lot of hunting, not just in the shoulder seasons when it could rain, but also in the winter time. And so being able to cover up my pack with the rain cover overnight and not having to worry about cramming my pack in the vestibule to keep it dry, I've just found functionally like a really beneficial thing to have an extra couple ounces in my pack for that rain cover. But all of that being said, I might experiment with the more put a big dry bag inside my pack and just stuff everything in system this year and see how it works for me.
You mentioned in there being a bigger guy, Jay. One question that came through, this guy said, I'm 6'5", 260 pounds. What is the best sleeping pad for me as a bigger guy and a side sleeper? Answer the sleeping pad question, Jay, but I'm also curious, any other things that come to mind for you being just a bigger guy, like you're super broad as you've worked with what pack apparel, I don't care what, like what has been maybe a challenge, but feel free to start with the sleeping pad.
So the first thing I'm going to do about the sleeping pad is I'm going to give you some dimensions and then you can go buy whatever brand you want. I would not sleep on a pad that's less than 3.5 inches thick, especially if you're 260. And I prefer vertically baffled sleeping pads because as a bigger guy, you're going to feel like you're rolling off. Like if you're on a Neo Air X-Lite with the horizontal baffles, um, and look for a pad whose outer baffles are bigger than the inner baffles. So, really great example of this, it's discontinued now, would be like the Q-Core SLX. I think the baffles running up the middle are maybe 3.25 inches, and the two outer baffles are 3.75. So, that is going to like roll you back into the center of your pad. So, you don't have a tendency to roll off to the side of the pad because you're going to take up your whole pad. But pads that I like that are currently in manufacturing, a Big Agnes, Repeat SL, the Ceta Summit, Etherlite XT. There's probably a couple others that I can't think of right now. But yeah, minimum baffle width, 3 to 3.5 inches. And as far as weight goals, don't expect to find anything that's going to give you a good night's sleep for less than 20 to 24 ounces. Because as soon as you start getting down into that like 18, 16, 12, it's just not going to be enough material to give you the comfort you need to sleep on your side, being a bigger guy. The other thing that I will say that's probably a greater contributor to the quality of your sleep as a big side sleeper, what people don't recognize is how far it is when we're on our side from our ear to the ground. You're looking at filling like 8 to 12 inches of space. So any of these like 4-inch backpacking pillows do a terrible job at, and then your neck is all cranked to the side. I tried everything under the sun. I Velcroed 2 pillows together. And then Steve was actually the one. Steve, what's that compound that you use to adhese like Velcro
Oh,
and
Aquaseal.
yes.
Yeah.
So Steve sent me the name of that stuff, and I was literally like using that to stick Velcro patches onto my sleeping pad and then Velcroing 2 different pillows together and then Velcroing that to my sleep. Like I was going nuts. My best recommendation I can give people right now is the new pillow that Brad from Argali put out. It's basically like a hybrid pillow. So it has small, like maybe an inch of padding on top, covered by this kind of like felty smooth material. And then it's just basically an empty pouch on the back. And you can stuff anything you want into the empty pouch. And the tip I'm going to give you is don't fold things before you put it in, because when you fold them, you make them hard. So literally, I just take my rain jacket, I open up this pouch, and I stuff my rain jacket in there. And then I zip it up. It doesn't have to be a puffy, it doesn't have to be gloves, it doesn't have to be something that has any inherent loft. Any fabric item will work. And I'm sleeping better. And I don't know what it weighs. It might weigh 4 ounces or something like that. But the fact that you can just use, because what I used to do was just take a dry bag and I would put like a rain jacket or a puffy and I would stuff it in the dry bag, fold the dry bag in half and use that as my pillow. Once I moved away from bringing all these other inflatable pillows, I think inflatable pillows by nature are problematic because as soon as you put enough air into them where they're thick enough that they do anything, they just turn into a hard rock. And I end up getting like a sore spot on my head. So that pillow from Brad from our Golly, I highly recommend. I've been using it ever since he sent the prototype back in August on all of my hunts. And I'm a big convert. The next do you guys want to hop in on it? I can talk about more big guy stuff, but do you guys have anything to add on the sleeping pad situation?
No, other than I saw Thermarest came out with a new pad called the Neo Loft. I want to say it's like 1 pound, 9 ounces. That looks like incredible. Um,
Huh.
it's like 4.5 inches thick, and I saw one the other day. I was at REI grabbing something, and I was like, "Holy crap!" Something to look into. Yeah,
The thing looks like a full-on mattress. I just
dude,
Googled it.
it looks like a memory foam mattress when you see it like blown up there, at least at REI on the shelf.
Yeah.
They have like a little table at the Boise one where you can like put the mattress on and actually lay on it. And it was
Huh.
laying on that table, and I was like, "What is that?" And I picked it up, and it's like, "This isn't that heavy." It was pretty impressive looking.
So
Uh,
4.6 inches thick, R value of 4.7. A regular is 1 pound, 9 ounces.
yeah,
And then you go up
it,
from
it
there if you do like a regular
was
wide or large, all the way
got
up to 2 pounds.
horizontal baffles, Jay, but it does have like raised railing edges to keep you from rolling off.
I'm looking at, yeah,
Hmm.
this thing's wild, man.
Yeah, side
Definitely a
rails.
little bit heavy for the
It's
what's the
25.
large is 2 pounds, but
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean that's yeah. If I was a regular dude and I could fit in that regular 1 pound 9 ounces, that's right where I was saying like that's 23 ounces. Like that I don't I think that's a reasonable expectation for a pad. I think it's everybody trying to get like sub 18 is where they end up with these like really this thing's wild though, man.
Yeah. Well, I have a Sea to Summit, that Comfort Plus red one that um if I'm just going elk hunting for 2, 3 days where my pack's already like under 20 pounds, then I pack that Sea to Summit because I sleep so much better on it. Um, but then I wuss out and go with the ultralight Neo Air on a like a true backpacking hunt where I'm trying to save every ounce, and just take an extra sleeping pill.
Yeah, just to echo your comments there, I use that pill from Brad this fall quite a bit as well. And it's interesting to me that it's, I don't know, I want to say come full circle in a way of I
Hmm.
used to never pack a pillow and I would just throw stuff in a stuff sack and make some sort of support. And then I went to the inflatable pillow and then I struggled with inflatable pillows. I finally found some I liked, had many I hated. And I was super hesitant to go back to stuffing things. But the way that it's kind of a hybrid, like you said, has actually worked quite well. It's a cool little pillow. And I think it's 3.5 ounces, maybe, Brad's.
Yep.
Yeah. So big guy stuff, I've never thought about this other than being long. Like I'm kind of tall, but in terms of, yeah, unique challenges to big dudes, I'm not big in the weight or broad sense. So yeah, I'm just curious. What is a challenge? What's a struggle? What have you learned?
Yeah, I'll just rip off some products and categories that I think I can offer some advice on. Uh, Quilts versus sleeping bags. Just buy a quilt. Don't bother with a sleeping bag because they're all going to feel constrictive. And as a bigger guy, you're probably going to generate more heat. So we don't tend to be as cold sleepers as the little guys, anyways. Um, so that was probably one of the biggest reasons why I fell in love with quilts as quickly as I did, as I was just so inherently more comfortable in them. And then further to that note, shelters. Like you need either find, and this is why I started doing shelter reviews the way I did. The measurements that shelter companies put on their sites are like one step away from useless once you start getting to the outer extents, like an 88-inch long shelter and an 82-inch long shelter, depending on the angle of the wall and the drape of the fabric, like you're going to think you have, look at a Hilleberg Acto. That thing says it's a certain length. Nobody taller than 5'8" can sleep inside of an Acto because you are literally going to have that inner shell hanging on your face because the walls go up at such a a low angle and that fabric drips down so much. And so find a video where you can see either a large sleeping pad inside of a shelter or somebody like me who's 6'1 plus get inside of a shelter. I like to be able to sit up in my shelter and sip on a cup of coffee. That knocks out about 75% of the shelters out there. Aceta Summit Telos TR2 is extremely tall on the inside. I was just taking an MSR Access 1 on my winter goat hunt this year. I was super impressed with that. It's a 4-season minimalist shelter, 3.7 pounds. I had lots of room to lay down. I could sit up inside of it and drink my coffee. But yeah, you got to be able to get visual evidence that you're going to fit inside that shelter, or it's going to drive you crazy. Packs, a lot of times what I tell people, if you're long and lean, a Stone Glacier will likely fit you if that's what you want to run. If you're not, it won't. The Exos and the Kafarus tend to fit bulkier guys better. Like the Stone Glacier kind of cuts my traps just because I have wide shoulders. And there are more, and it like Kurt's one of the best designers on the planet, but take a look at Kurt. It's not a surprise that the packs fit the way they fit based at Kurt's body shape and size. And there's other categories. I'm trying to think specifically where like boots are always a pain because like I've got size 14 feet. So it's normally like not a function of what boots I want. It's like what boots can I actually order that they even make? Because a lot of the European boots won't even, a European 48 or a 48 and 2/3 tends to be what translates over to a 14. And a lot of the European boots stop at 46. So you're kind of, your selection is somewhat limited. But yeah, if I think of any other stuff, I'll make a little post on my page. But those are some big guy things that that I've found useful.
What comes to mind on budget stuff? A guy wrote in and said, I know I have to invest in boots and a pack, but what other specific gear can I spend less on? And I think assuming he's just heard Steve and I talk about that, of saying, like, if you have money to spend and the one thing you want to get right is boots and a pack, and we're not saying that selfishly, it's just true, at least for backcountry or backpack hunting. From there, it's like go wherever you want. But from your perspective, Jay, like, where can you save? What are some good budget gear, whether that's specific items or like categories of stuff?
I think apparel is a huge one. Stop caring whether you're walking around and decked out in Sitka or Kuyu. There have been mountaineering brands on this planet long before any of those other brands were even a twinkle in their father's eye, who have been making phenomenal apparel, arguably better than the stuff we use in the hunting space. And it goes on sale all the time. And as long as you're not buying like bright purple or rainbow colored stuff, 99% of the times animals don't care if you're in solids or camo anyways. And so, look at, you can go into REI and get a pair of pants for $75. You can get a quick drying long sleeve for $35. I bet you I could dress an entire hunter for an elk hunt for less than $300 at REI. And that's not going to get you a pair of pants from Sitka or Kuyu. Don't get me wrong. When you got the money, yeah, go get the stuff you like, but I think you can save a ton of money on apparel. I think there's lots of little items. Like I am still 3 years later using a stove and a pot I bought off Amazon. It's a titanium setup. It's called an Ollie Camp. I think I bought the stove for $45 and the pot for $65. And it's basically like a knockoff MSR pocket rocket, but it's actually lighter than the pocket rocket. And I did this whole video series on how important are fins on your pot. I forget the exact figure, but I think it requires 33% less energy to make water boil when there's fins on the bottom of the pot. Go find one with fins because you're going to burn less fuel getting that water to boil. And this Ollie Camp pot has those fins, and that was why I bought it in the first place. And so there's other there's other items that you can save money like that. Like I think a lot of the stuff we buy in the hunting space is kind of overpriced because of brand. Some things are not. Like here's the reason why hunting, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the podcast with you guys, but hunters have much different requirements out of a pack than through hikers or mountaineers. Like
Yeah.
no one hiking the West Coast Trail has ever put 120 pounds in their pack, ever in the history of through hiking. If those guys see 40 pounds, that's a heavy pack. So for items like that, I think it's super important we're in the hunting space. Boots fall into the same category because we do wear slightly different boots than some mountaineering applications. So I can see an argument for why a more hunting centric boot could play a role. But for anything else, like making food, I don't care what you're doing in the forest. Everybody needs to make food the same way. The clothes, you need to stay warm, you need to stay dry. These are not unique to being a hunter. So I would say, think about it in those principles. Like, are there other domains that have bigger consumer segments that utilize these same products? Because the bigger the consumer segment, the larger the degree of competition, the larger the degree of competition, the lower the price of the products is going to be because they're forced that way because they have to compete with more people. You don't have to do that in the hunting space. I've actually had this idea because a lot of people have been hitting me up for budget recommendations, and I think I'm going to do it this fall. I think I'm going to do like an Amazon hunt, and I'm only going to let myself buy stuff off of Amazon. And I'm going to go do like a 3-day backcountry mule deer hunt in BC with like shelter, apparel, everything except for weapon, and try and do the whole thing for less than $1,000 off of Amazon or something like that. Because I think there's probably a lot more low hanging fruit there than like I'm spoiled these days because people just send stuff for review. So it's been years since I had to go like look for cheap stuff. So I think I could probably provide more value to people in that regard than I currently do.
Yeah, there's along those same lines, there's in my head, like I saw the list of questions for this, and I'm almost becoming, I don't want to say jaded by gear questions, but it goes back to your talking about sheep hunters and the guides who actually know that like, oh, you don't need the best spine scope in the market because by the time you get close enough, any scope's probably going to be sufficient. But just that guys expecting gear to make like to significantly affect the outcome of their hunt, when just so much of it just doesn't matter.
Yep.
It just doesn't. And maybe that's just through experience, I'm learning that. Like when I'm first starting out, I was obsessed with like this piece of glass versus that piece of glass, or this tent versus that tent, or I mean, name it, any of these gear categories. And there's like the more you do it, the more you realize some things matter. The vast majority of it, I like this. I love this idea of Amazon. Like I could buy 95% of my gear off Amazon and be just as effective this fall in the field.
I think it comes down to anxiety. I think when people are new to the backcountry, there's so much out of their control. It
Yeah.
creates a lot of anxiety, and so they look for things they can control, and that's the gear they buy. Like guys will ask me, like, I have threads going like 2 years back where the guy still hasn't pulled the trigger on a spotter. Oh, but what about this one? This one's, and I'm like, I'm gonna lose my mind, bro. Just go buy a spotter. Nobody cares. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't. The Kawa 65 versus the Swaro. Like, geez, my God, man, just buy something. But it's this like lack of decision making ability paired with this like control anxiety, and it's like it's this weird catch 22 because until you get confident enough, you're not even going to realize that none of this shit matters, man. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're 100% right.
Yeah. I like your perspective there about that anxiety and controlling what you can't control. And so some of that, the psychological aspect of that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, and I think when you explain it to people, they can get it. You know what I mean? It's like just calm down, man. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and I think fitness falls in the same category. Like if you, and it's also like stuff you can post about. And we've had this conversation on one of our previous podcasts, and I got reminded of it this year. You know, if you ask me what my first priority is this year out of everything that I do, weapon, gear, fitness, it's scouting. I'm putting more of a priority, like, how do I free up time to go scout? Where am I going to go scout? Like, that's more important than anything else on the planet to me this year because I'm sick of showing up and having the first 3/4 of my hunt be a glorified scouting mission and then only having 2 or 3 days to seal the deal and not experiencing the success I know I could be if I was more prepared. And so, I mean, how long has it taken me to learn that? I'm going on 8, 9 years in the backcountry now. And in some things, I feel like I'm just figuring out the basics.
It's good. Short and sweet. Best backcountry breakfast on a hunt.
Yeah. So I take a very specific brand of Cheerios. It is it's like a cinnamon crunch version of Cheerios. And I take 2 ounces of that paired with 1.5 ounces of Craisins, paired with 2 scoops of vanilla whey isolate protein. I put all of that in a vacuum bag and a vacuum seal it shut. And then I open it up. I put a cup or two of cold water on it in the morning and I stir it up. The vanilla protein turns into like kind of a vanilla-y milk. And I have a bowl of cereal every morning. And I don't eat my breakfast until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. Like if I get up at 5, I have coffee, that's it. And then I get a big chunk of my day done before I worry about food. I don't like eating as soon as I get up. But that cereal with protein, and that's about 600 calories with 50 grams of protein. And protein is the hardest macro in my experience to get in the backcountry. And so starting my day with a nice big shot of 50 grams kind of helps me hit my macro goals for the day.
Hmm.
Sounds good. Do you do that? Do you struggle to do that on cold weather hunts to eat a cold meal like that?
Nope. Love it.
Yeah.
And I tried doing it hot and I don't like it.
Hmm.
And it's still, yeah, like, we didn't, that second round of my goat hunt that I went on this year, uh, we did 5 nights at minus 27 degrees Celsius, which is minus 17 Fahrenheit. And it was cold. Like I got frostbite on 2 toes. It was cold, cold. And still loved that. That cereal dish was one of
Yeah.
my favorite things I ate every day.
So there was a question it said, and I'm not sure how to interpret this, but it said, "What is your routine for cold weather?" Or it said, "What is your routine for cold or freezing weather?" I put in parentheses after routine or tips because I don't know what he means by routine. If it's like nighttime routine, staying warm while glassing, whatever. I don't know what routine means, but you just mentioned some extremely cold temperatures. What have you learned about, yeah, what do you do to be able to stay out there and hunt and live in those temperatures?
So when you start getting that cold, everything comes down to moisture management. So it's like managing your moisture is secondary to how far am I going to hike today, or when do I move, or like what do I do, or how long do I stay in bed? Like, because as soon as you get wet, you're done because you can't get unwet without taking certain steps. And so a lot of what I do revolves around that. So my entire sleep system, which I just did a big podcast on, all revolves around a synthetic quilt because no matter what happens at night, I can get into my quilt. And by the time I wake up in the morning, everything that I got in wearing will be dry. So I get to hit the reset button every night. There's other little tips like this year I was experimenting with they're Japanese fishing gloves. If you go on Amazon and just type in Japanese fishing glove, they're these black rubberized Showa fishing gloves. They're like felt lined, they're fully waterproof, and they're like one of the best things I've used in the winter yet. But even them, to some degree, are going to get moisture in them. And so I learned, oh, if I put my rain jacket in my pillow, in Brad's pillow, and then I take my gloves, fold them in half, and put them on top of the rain jacket in my pillow, between my rain jacket and my head, the heat from my head will keep them warm through the night. So when I put my gloves on in the morning, they're not going to be frozen. Um, and then I carry them throughout the day. Whenever I take them off, they go in between two of my puffies so that they stay warm and they don't freeze. Because once they freeze, they're really hard to get unfrozen. Another thing I do on extreme cold weather hunts, especially because at that time of year you don't have a lot of daylight, is I actually have two bedtimes. And so when you get back to camp, it's usually getting dark at the latest, like 5 p.m. And so you cannot go to bed for 16 hours. Like you would lose your mind. So normally when I get back to camp, I'm kind of sweaty. There's a bunch of stuff going on. So I will um, make my first dinner, leave my boots on because I'm trying to use the heat from my body to push as much moisture out of those boots as possible. I will eat my first dinner and then I'll get into bed. I'll put an audiobook on, and typically I fall asleep with that audiobook on. I'll wake up an hour and a half later. I'll have no idea where I am. There's this guy with a British accent talking in my ear. I'm kind of lost for a minute, and then I'm like, okay, right. Then I'll get back out of bed. By this point, it's like maybe somewhere between 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I get out of bed. I'm already in my clothes because I sleep in my clothes. I'll go have a bathroom break and I make the second half of whatever I'm making for dinner that night. And we could spend more time about cold weather food if we wanted to, but I break it up so I specifically have two dinners. And then I have a second dinner and I putter around camp. Is there anything that I need to fix from the night before? Do I need to clean my optics? I try and stay busy, get the blood pumping, warm up a little bit. Like it was minus 15, minus 16 degrees Fahrenheit at like 9 p.m. at night. And you can't just sit there. You get very cold very fast. You got to be doing something. So I'll kill another hour or two, and then I'll get back into bed at maybe 10 o'clock at night, and then I can sleep from 10 to 7, no problem, because it's like a regular night. And I don't. The other thing is winter shelters tend to be much smaller, so you feel kind of claustrophobic in there. So spending a large amount of time in there is just not possible. I mean, I could go on for deep winter stuff forever. Like I think it's my biggest passion. The last tip that I'll give is in regards to boots. So I have always used a pair of La Sportiva Nepal GTXs. These are very iconic boots. They're the big yellow ones. Everybody's seen them in some kind of mountaineering video. They have always served me well, but this year was about 10 degrees colder than anything else I'd ever done. And the problem is they got frozen to such a degree. You could barely get your feet in them. And then I wouldn't get feeling in my toes until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then by 5 o'clock at night, it's frozen. It gets so cold, they actually freeze. I had one night where I almost couldn't get my boots off because it'd gotten so cold while I was wearing my boots that my feet, and I couldn't actually get the laces undone or fed through the eyelets, which was a bit of an experience. And so if you're going to go like real hardcore expedition cold, you have to use a pair of double layer boots, like mountaineering style boots that have, and I don't mean like the hard plastic ski boots ones. There's like the next generation of those. Mammoth has some, Scarpa has some, La Sportiva has some. They'll basically be like a neoprene booty with usually some type of boa fit system. And then that goes inside of like a harder shell that normally zips closed. And the reason you do that is that the harder shell won't absorb any moisture, so there's nothing to freeze, and you can wear the neoprene booties to bed at night. And that way you can kind of like dry them out because there's no real way. I tried to take one of those Graxaw boot dryers, and at minus 17 degrees Fahrenheit, it doesn't even turn on, which is interesting to note. And when I finally did get it to turn on, it does less than nothing to dry out boots when it's that cold because there's no warm air to force through the boot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what everybody's figured out about those. And I will share that now. If you're not in a hot tent, save your battery. Blowing air through your boots isn't going to do anything if you're in a high humidity or a low temperature environment.
Yeah.
Dude, I love the idea. I say love, knowing it would be miserable. I love the idea of doing like a late winter goat hunt like that. Like one of these years, I'm just going to call you Jay and come suffer with you if you let me.
Anytime.
No tag, no nothing. Just want to experience it.
I think it's my favorite hunt, man. There is, and I am actually releasing a film about this one. I didn't kill a goat. I found a goat on the very last day. It turned out to be a nanny. You can legally kill a nanny if you want in British Columbia, but a winter goat is kind of like my own white whale, and I firmly believe sometimes how you do a thing is more important than what you do. And when I finally kill my winter goat, it'll be a billy. It sure as hell won't be a nanny. Um, but I am going to put together the film because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think it's just a really interesting story. But dude, we hiked 5,600 feet. We made it on top of the Cambrian ice field. Like I'm literally hiking around on top of a glacier looking for goats. Like I was just like, it was one of the most surreal. The very last night, we're hiking back in the pitch black, and sorry, not the pitch black, in the middle of the night, but the moon was so big and we were up so high above everything. The entire walk back to camp, we didn't even turn on our headlamps. Like it felt like the afternoon. It was everything had this weird glow from the moon. And there's something about the combination of the cold and the snow on the ground making everything quiet. And there's like, you don't get the normal bird song, you don't get the chipmunks, the mountains just feel like a completely different place. And it has this severity to it. And the cold is one of those things that psychologically, it's very challenging. Like when I'm at home and I'm thinking I'm going to go spend 5 nights in -30, I feel like puking. I get anxious, my palms get sweaty. But then once you're out there and you've got your system, you've got the right apparel, and this is one of those hunts where gear will make or break you. It won't help you kill stuff, but it will help you not die. Once you have your gear and you've got your systems dialed and you're like, I would imagine it's what like a submarine pilot would feel like, or one of those like deep water, underwater, like oil rig welders would feel like. You're like, I am in one of the most inhospitable places on earth. And not only am I surviving, I'm thriving. And that just gives you this sense of exuberance. Like it's hard to put it into words, and it's just such a unique experience. I wish more people had an opportunity to do it, but there's not a whole lot of February goat tags kicking around for people to go hunt.
Well, if you're interested in a free packer, I might know a guy.
Yeah. Anytime, man. Legitimately. I would love it. You would love it. I know you well enough. You would. Yeah, it's a trip, man.
Yeah.
Is that a hunt you do every year?
Almost. Actually, it tends to be every other year. And I think a lot of that has to do with like that type 2 fun. It like takes me a year to like process it all and be like, all right, okay. Yeah, I'm ready. And the funny thing is the hardest part is the snowshoeing. Like when you get, the first year, and here's a testament to how far I've come as a hunter. The first year I did that hunt, my pack with weapon was 93 pounds.
Oh,
bro. And I was in peak bulking for my first bodybuilding competition. So I weighed 271 pounds. So me and pack was 364 pounds on my snowshoes. Yeah. And I've never done anything as physically grueling as that. Like walking around in snowshoes with being 365 pounds. Crazy, ridiculous. And this year my pack was down to 68 pounds and I went in for longer than I did that first year. That includes weapon, that includes everything. So that's a testament to just being ruthless with your gear list. Like there's a lot of shit you don't need.
Yeah.
Steve, is there anything else on the list of questions you want to ask Jay before we let him go? I could keep chatting forever.
No, I just enjoy the hell out of talking with you, Jay. Such a great perspective and a way of communicating things. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you guys every time. There's one question there that I thought was hilarious that no one else has ever asked, so I'm going to address it. And the question was, if Jay is such an elk nut, why is his logo a mule deer? And well done to whoever thought of that. It has never occurred to me once how inconsistent that is in my branding. But there's a very clear story. And yes, elk hunting is my passion. And I could not be more excited for the season that I've got in front of me. That mule deer, the antlers that you're looking at on my logo, is a 3x4 mule deer. And that is very intentional. That was a mule deer that I killed with my bow in Arizona. And it was the first time, and I want to make sure and communicate this correctly. It was the first time, and I'm going to use the word I want to use regardless of how it lands. It is the first time I'd intentionally gone after a trophy animal. And I don't mean I wanted some score to get in some book. It meant that I'd killed, I don't even know by then, maybe 20 or 30 animals, but they'd all been like little deer and stuff back home here in BC. And I knew I could kill something, but it was like I wanted to see if I could kill something special, like something old, something that was more of a worthy adversary. And I was able to take that deer with my bow, 55 yards, drilled him, double lung pass through, and he scores 170 inches. He has a 33-inch outside spread. He's hung in my studio. If anybody watches my videos, that's the deer that's behind me off to the left-hand side. And when it was time to put together a logo, I also just loved that he was a 3x4. I was just like, seeing the 4x4 is so common, or a 6-point elk is so common. And so, yeah, that is why I have a mule deer as a logo, even though I am a self-confessed elk junkie.
There was one question on there, Jay. It said, who do you respect in the hunting industry? This isn't planned. I'm not trying to blow smoke, but as I was looking over the questions, what didn't we get to? That question was there. And every time I think I speak with you, I feel that way more and more about you. So I just want to say thanks for what you're doing. Like even going back to all the unfortunate like influencer bullcrap. As well as I know you, I know that you're genuine about stuff. Like as you've said before, you're not out there just to kill the animals. That hasn't been why you've been passionate about hunting. That's not what you're trying to build with your quote unquote influence or platform or whatever. It's just super cool. I appreciate the way you help people. And honestly, I've seen where you have just been open to being wrong, open to being continuing to learn, and more of us need to do that. So I just want to say thanks, man.
I appreciate that, and it goes right back at you guys. Like I say it all the time, and I don't think it can be said enough how much you guys do for the industry, and for the, not even for the industry, that came out wrong, but for people and for hunters. One of the only, it was funny. I was trying to think of, because I saw that question and I was trying to think, because a lot of times, and I don't want to be negative, but maybe because of the content I make, it comes across like I'm calling people out, or focusing on the people who are biased and who are doing paid affiliate deals and all that kind of stuff. And I don't spend enough time calling out the highlights in the industry, the people that are putting out like really solid information. So it was almost a bit of a call out to me, whereas like I think I want to do a bit better job of shining lights on some of those people, because they're around, man. You know what I mean? Like, and I almost feel like I feel like the pendulum is swinging back a little bit in that regard. And maybe I'm just being optimistic, but I feel like there's more skepticism in a positive way. There's more honest gear stuff coming out. And hopefully with, platforms like yours and platforms like mine, guys keep finding the stuff, the info that they need to be more successful, or just to help them find what they're looking for to get out of this thing that we all love to do a bit more efficiently.
Well, that is a wrap. Be sure to check out the links in the show description to get more of Jay's content, resources, and reviews, that breakfast recipe that Jay mentioned, and a whole lot more. Also in the link in the show description, you can find out how to contact us and leave a question for any future episodes. And if you haven't yet, be sure to hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive all future episodes automatically for free. And we'll talk to you soon.